So good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Environmental Social Justice. Today I have a special guest, Mr. Raphael Heffron. He is a professor in global energy and law and sustainability at the University of Dundee. So welcome, Raphael. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. And hopefully I will do you proud and continue your series, which I think is very informative.
Thank you.
I'll do a good job from over here in the UK.
Oh, God, thank you so much. That's such a nice compliment to get. We do try. So you are a professor. You have a huge history in sustainability and energy, numerous keynotes. I think you do a couple hundred keynotes a year before the pandemic. So you're well versed in this. And one of the topics you and I had previously discussed was how the US, the United States, has not necessarily been the most sustainable country. We're a little late to the game. I like to mention to people that the last 4 years we took a little nap and we're just kind of getting caught up with the rest of Europe and the UK. So, in your opinion, would you say that the US owes a responsibility to the rest of the world for unsustainable practices?
Yeah, I think, let's say, to be very brief, the US does. And we can see a couple of major reasons why. I mean, let's not even go into the 4-year nap, but let's think about the US being a leader in the global economy.
Yes.
And as a leader, it should really be forcing its own companies to invest in green and cleaner technology. And you can complain about the advances of other countries, for example, like China, but the reality is there has to be some inward reflection in the US to say, why have we not encouraged all this type of technology to a greater extent? And I think it's a missed opportunity when you consider the people who live in the US and you consider all those excellent universities, and they're very good at producing, or you could argue not producing. Some people drop out, but technology companies are produced by, in the US, you have some of the leading global technology firms. And I wonder, why isn't that oriented a bit towards making the world a more sustainable place? And just recall a few points. I see that in different places, someone like Bill Gates gets lots of kudos for his foundation. But I don't really recall Microsoft ever really encouraging the whole computer industry to be more sustainable. I mean, all of us probably have several telephone chargers, several computer chargers that we barely use anymore. And, even simple things like reusing the same chargers could be better practice. And let's say, I think where the US is more literate on all this type of technology, they lead in the production of it. And the global spread, you just have to look at the success, let's say, of Apple. And I think really the US should be a global leader, far ahead of where it's positioned today. And I think for me, coming from let's say the UK EU perspective, it's a great shame that you have two political parties banging their heads against each other, and they're missing the clean and green energy revolution that needs to happen, and that the US owes a level of responsibility to the rest of the world for.
I love the fact that you brought up a lot of things I want to talk about. First of all, the politics side of things. We are battling each other, and we will get no resolution and no progress if we're constantly fighting each other and only interested is, did that idea come from a Democrat or Republican? Because unless he's playing on my team, I'm going to vote against it. And that makes absolutely no sense. We should be focused on just one path to a more sustainable lifestyle. And then going on to the computer chargers and everything like that, we consume way more than we need. And a lot of it started with the whole keeping up with the Joneses, buying more things, showing off to each other who has more. My personal pet peeve is when a charger just stops working. And usually that's like a couple years. It'll just, oh, well, that's the lifespan of the charger. You now have to get a new one. And or even your cell phone. I hold on to cell phones until they are practically smoking that I cannot use it anymore. And then I'll get the notification that it can no longer accept the updates because it's so out of date. And we should be using these things until they literally, I mean, I had a flip phone up until, yes, I was ridiculed for having one for so long, but it worked. Why would I replace it? And that's the whole political side and policy and do as I say, not as I do, which unfortunately is very common. But we should be a world leader. We should be moving forward. And just to transition from the sustainability side of things, how does the social justice aspect fit into it? Because economically, we have the haves and the have-nots, and our middle class is pretty much deteriorated. If you look at, what people are able to buy, and the pandemic really soared certain people into a different stratosphere and destituted other people. So how does social justice fit into that progress that you're talking about?
Yeah, well, I think we need to take that point you just made there, that the social inequality is on the rise and getting even worse. The extreme is getting even worse. And I'll just use a simple example. I mean, when we think of the electric car, why is it that the development around the electric car sees Elon Musk become a billionaire again? This is repeating the same economic system that we've had before.
Yeah.
There needs to be a question in society. What society do we want, and what energy system do we want? It should support a fair society. And I'll just give you two quick examples. I mean, you have the Enron scandal, which primarily was based out of California, and you ask yourself today, what has actually changed in the energy sector from that scandal to where we are today? And if I was being very, very cynical, I'd say the only thing that's changed is Arthur Andersen went out of business. Accenture still exists.
Yeah, but they changed their name.
Everything else is nearly the same. And I just say we think back to that scandal 2001, 20 years ago. So it's worth reflecting, have things improved for the, let's say, the common man or woman? And we think that a more recent scandal in California was the Alicio Canyon scandal, where there was a leak which emitted nearly, I think, the same amount of CO2 as the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. And again, I just wonder, has anything been learned from that Alicio Canyon leak? Because when they discovered that leak, they said there were around 20,000 other oil and gas wells around the state of California alone that were in a similar state of, let's call it, disrepair or not cleaned up, restored properly. And you think, who is paid for all those 20,000 to be to make sure that they're restored properly and they won't be leaks? I imagine if any of them have been restored properly so they won't leak, I imagine it's been the Californian taxpayer. Where is the obligation on the energy companies to actually get to be a proper stakeholder in this society that we need, instead of taking their focus just being on taking the money out? And for me, if they're to represent their shareholders properly, they need to be thinking in a more medium to longer term sort of scenario, with a more medium to longer term scenario, because we see you see in California the fires, everything. Insurance is going up for people
Oh,
in all walks of life. This is only going to increase, and the reality is, people at some point people will say, "Look, I don't want to use your energy anymore," and they'll be out of business. Potentially overnight. So a day of reckoning is going to come if they don't become a fully paid up stakeholder in all of this.
It's interesting with when you said I don't want your energy anymore. We are a bit trapped in where we can and cannot get our energy from. Even now, I don't currently have solar power on my roof because we need to replace the roof and it's a whole thing. But when we've looked into it and researched it and found contractors to give us quotes, one of the things that came up is you still have to be connected to the electric company, and they still charge you a service fee for the privilege of still being hooked up. And I thought that was interesting. If you want to be off grid, you really can't. And then going back to SoCal Gas, who did the Aliso Viejo, I have spoken to them about that, and it was definitely a wake up call. I do find it interesting that all of our energy companies are privately owned, but collect taxpayer dollars for operations. That is a very interesting thing that I might do a little bit of digging in myself later on, in a friendly way. I try to keep things friendly. I don't throw daggers at people. I try to understand rather than fight. Hence, therefore, we're bringing people together. We're going down the same path. But it's interesting. They did learn their lesson, and they are heavily focused on green hydrogen. So a lot of our wind turbines that are in Eastern California near Palm Springs, a lot of that energy is created, but we can't properly store it. So they either dump it by electrifying the ground, or we pay the neighboring state to take it away from us, which makes no sense, but we do that. So they're taking some of that surplus green energy and creating hydrogen through it. So that's a development that's happening. But again, we all need to adapt and change and be the leaders that you have claimed that we should be. That being said, going back to the US responsibility to the rest of the world, other countries like India and China that also have large greenhouse gas emissions, what's their responsibility? Just to kind of level the playing field, just because I personally don't know. I don't know that answer.
Well, let's say when we're considering things from a point of transition, we have to remember that the US economy is far more advanced in terms of its economic transition, in terms of economic development. So we can't really apply the same rules to India or China.
Okay.
Economically they're not as developed. We can say yes, they have some responsibility, but it's the leading nations in the Western world. They should be assisting India and China to move away from being from fossil fuels to in a faster way. And I think that's where there needs to be a bit more collaboration around technology transfer.
Absolutely.
And the big issue is, if we can do it in health around the vaccines and make sure, I know it's not fully successful yet, but considering that we did get a vaccine to work in a short space of time in comparison to normal, the solutions are out there, and
Yeah.
we should be now thinking of some type of shared solution. There's enough clean and green technology that needs to be built, to go around all the big economies. It doesn't need to be some big competition or fight. We all need it, and it'll benefit everyone.
And yeah, it should be benefiting everyone, which brings in the human rights aspect. So human rights with respect to energy and sustainability, I mean, it's obvious to people who actively work in this industry, the benefits to people in, for example, if you grow up near a power plant and you have pollution basically being rained down on you every day as a child, you're going to have health issues going forward in life. You're going to be more susceptible to illness. You're going to be more susceptible to things like COVID, which affect your lungs because you have that pre-existing issue. And a lot of people don't realize that. So, what's the human rights aspect moving forward?
Well, it's the human rights aspect is getting very big because, in a way, let's say you could argue, thanks to some of the American tech companies, because we have more data that's accessible than ever before, and people are doing all sorts of magic things with the data. So, exactly as you say, you can predict, on average, how much of your life, if you grew up near one of those plants you're talking about, how much your life will be restricted by, how much your health care is going to cost you over your life.
Yep.
And the more we get this type of data, the more it's becoming easier for people to say, well, if you knowingly were polluting near my house, knowing this was what you were doing, you were actually breaching a fundamental human right of mine, and therefore I'm able to go to the local court, and if they refuse me there, a higher court, and you are able to get your human rights protected. And we will see more and more of this, because
we are seeing that develop. Yes.
Yeah, and the whole area of data and data analysis is not going away. It's just going to increase, and we will be able to hold these firms to account very, very soon. And it's already happening in countries all over the world. I think in maybe something like 45 countries, there are different legal cases around trying to protect human rights. And if you ask me, it's about, we have pictures and we have images, and everyone has them, because we didn't have them before. They weren't so freely, you couldn't send them around to everyone. But in today's world, we can, I can send you an image of some environmental damage, from down the road, and you will have it the other side of the world in
seconds.
So, and people are utilizing data in so many different ways. It's going to be very hard for the companies to say, they're going to have higher ethical standards, because people are going to hold them to account and say, come on, you can no longer stick your head in the sand and say, we didn't know.
Yes. And you are absolutely right, because there's now so much evidence being created from, we are in this information superhighway right now. We have more data than we've ever had before. But one thing to point out, because a lot of people, when they say, you knew about that release, you knew that you were putting these toxins into the atmosphere. I've had people say, well, insurance will just cover it. That's why you have a pollution policy. And the thing is, I worked in insurance for many, many years, and there are a couple things that cause a problem with that. One is knowingly discharging. So that's right there, deny the claim. You knew what you were doing. And two, every state in the United States has their own laws where you have to get a permit to be allowed to do this kind of pollution release, discharging. So that not only says we knew what we were doing, but we were given permission. We were allowed to. So that's where it's going to get a little tricky in the US. And I know a lot of insurance companies have been working very hard to respond to those claims. So it'd be interesting to see, will the companies be paying for it? Will the insurance carriers be paying for it? Will it just be tied up in litigation? Because America is very litigious. People sue for some of the dumbest things. I worked in claims. I saw my fair share of frivolous lawsuits. So that'll be an interesting challenge moving forward on the human rights aspect.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think, I don't think the insurance companies will be paying. They haven't paid for climate damage really before. So
yeah, people are trying though. They're filing. But we will see. Now, looping it back to the United States responsibility and joining the rest of the world with moving forward in sustainability, I think we're now getting back on track. We were definitely behind the EU and the UK. What would you, just as we're closing out on our 20 minutes here, what would you like to see us do? Because, you were obviously an expert in this. You've done that for many years. What would you like to see?
Well, what I would like to see is a bit more let's call it joined up thinking, or a bit more convergence of ideas, and a bit more of challenging the status quo. And I just give you one example from a significant Californian academic, Professor Stephen Chu, who I believe he still works at Berkeley, but he was also served as Secretary for Energy, I believe, for a term and a half at least.
Yep.
And he said that, I listened to a talk of his, and he said that in California, they tried to change the energy efficiency standards around white goods and, fridges, washing machines, etc. And as a policymaker, I believe at the time, and some lawyers, and let's say coming from myself from a legal background, that the lawyers were saying, you have 3 years to do it, to get these energy efficiency targets down.
Cool.
The engineers who make this type of equipment, they said, we'll never be able to do it in 3 years. And the economists said, if you bring in these tougher standards, the price will go up, because it'll cost more money, and if the price goes up, then a lot of people won't be able to afford these white goods. But what happened, the policymakers and the lawyers stuck to their guns, let's say, and said, you only have 3 years. And what happened was the engineers did their job, and they actually exceeded their targets. They made them even more energy efficient. And what else? They made them cheaper. So they actually, let's say, debunked the economic theory behind, if we raise standards, costs will go up. And to me, I think that's one of the big challenges we face. We have all these economists and naysayers saying, oh, if we do this action, costs will go up. But actually, I think we should combine people together, and the great expertise that exists in the world, and let's say particularly in America, that we should believe that people can bring solutions that will not cost lots and lots of money. And I would just use that example from Professor Stephen Chu. So it's not my example, it's his. Yeah. So that there are huge possibilities here, and I think we shouldn't listen to the people who say, oh, if we want some change, that means the costs will go up, because it doesn't have to. And there are many cases where that's not going to be the case.
Oh, absolutely.
So I believe that there are great possibilities, and America, California could be at the center of that.
Well, hopefully that will happen. And I agree, California kind of leads the way with the whole renewable energy aspect. And, with the cost, you're absolutely right. Solar panels used to be prohibitively expensive, and now they're not. And the technology is better. They store more, they generate more electricity. So it keeps getting better and better with time. That's what I love about scientists and engineers. We don't let politics get in our way. We just work towards a common goal of figuring out and solving problems. That's what we do all day long. So brilliant discussion. Thank you so much. Hopefully we will get people to work more collaboratively, cross the pond, work with other countries. It doesn't have to be just us and them. We're all in this together. And on that, I have to give the Star Trek reference, the United Federation. We're one world.
Exactly. We should have a cosmopolitan perspective.
We should.
Where we're all world citizens.
Absolutely. We are world citizens. I love that. I'm going to use that. I'm stealing it. So thank you so much. This has been brilliant. You have a wonderful day.
Same to you.